Hello and welcome to Season 2 of the Life at Leyton Podcast, with me, Sarah Glanville, as your host. Here at Leyton UK, we know our people are more than just their job. The careers of our people are part of their unique lives, and who they are as a whole person is what fundamentally contributes to their success and the success of our business. In the podcast, we'll spend time with one of our exceptional people from across the business. And in each episode, we'll look to explore the people behind the job titles, the unique and brilliant stories that make them who they are. In today's episode, we welcome Marco Spiro to the podcast. Marco leads our client delivery teams across the UK, and today he talks about carving a career for himself at Leyton over the last 8 years. Marco decided to move away from the more traditional consulting progression path and created a business case for investing in consulting soft skills and client relationships. Over the past 4 years, that has grown into his current role, leading our client delivery and client support teams, ensuring we offer the best possible service for new and existing clients. Thank you, Marco, for sharing your wisdom and advice. This episode is a great reminder to us all that patience pays off, and that when we bring the best of ourselves to work, we can collaborate to create something pretty special. And thank you all for tuning in. Grab yourself a coffee and get ready to be inspired by the people that are Leyton UK. Hello Marco, welcome to the Life at Leyton podcast. How are you?
I'm good. It's been an ambition of mine to join the podcast, so glad to do it nice and early on a Monday morning too.
Yes, we're both saying that we're feeling really refreshed after our weekends, aren't we? So
definitely. So, but the sun's shining in London, and I walked into work this morning in the light. So spring is coming.
Yes, and how good does that feel? I'm glad that you've been so excited to come onto the podcast. It's really good to have you here, and I'm really excited about the topic that we're going to be covering today. Do you want to start us off today by explaining to our listeners what the client delivery team does here at Leyton and what your role is within that team?
Sure. As head of client relationships at Leyton, the client delivery team is split into two parts. So you have the client success team and the client delivery team. Now that might sound like they are sort of pretty similar teams, but ultimately we split our teams in client relationships by new business and repeat revenue. So the client success team looks at clients in their initial delivery process with Leyton. They liaise with our business development team and perform the handover to the consultancy team and work with the clients for the first sort of delivery cycle with them, which hopefully should take around 2 months to complete. Once the initial delivery cycle is complete, then each client success associate then would pass over the client to a member of our client delivery team. So we have a good team of about 12 across London, Manchester, and Glasgow that see to our clients and ensure that from the moment they're signed, they feel like they are part of the same Leyton experience.
Fantastic. And what's your role within that team?
Yeah, so I sort of oversee the people management side. I've got an excellent manager on the team she's based in Glasgow, and she's after all the client delivery team, and then I directly oversee them and the client success team as well. So my role really, technically, as in that role, every client's success and happiness rests with myself and my team. So there's never really a dull moment, because it might be helping out one of the team with a contract negotiation. It might be looking after a client that perhaps sort of hasn't received their benefit in a timely manner from HMRC. It might be helping one of the more junior consultants with a complex tax assessment. But in this role, it seems like no day is ever the same, and the remit is ever expanding. We also sort of look at clients that have been with us for an extended period of time, and what we can do to constantly innovate in our process and obtain feedback from them. So that's another big part of this role, is getting feedback from our clients. In a professional services business, what is extremely important is that we provide that all-encompassing service to our clients, and also that standards don't slip on a year-to-year basis. So it's a wide-ranging role. It's a fast-paced role, but it's one that is very necessary in a service-led business.
Absolutely. Always trying to, as you say, innovate and level up the service that we're offering to clients is so important. Can you share your career journey with Leyton so far? So how did you find yourself in this role?
Sure. That's a good question. So I joined Leyton as a fresh-faced, sort of, I think, 23-year-old, a long time ago now, about 8 years ago. So I'm one of the older guard. And I joined as a financial consultant, just in the consultancy team. And I then sort of progressed to being a senior consultant, and then to being a manager. And I think once you get to the manager stage, there were two options, two paths that were sort of open for me, and for most people in the consultancy team, which is being a people manager or a process manager. Now, at the time, I wanted, it was less defined, and I think I'll probably expand on that later, but I wanted to go down a route that played to my strengths. Whilst being a financial consultant, the minutiae of the tax technical world is something that, of course, I have to come to terms with, but it's not where my strengths lie. And there are many other people in the team who are much more interested and much more concerned with the level of detail in specific tax legislation. Where I found a lot of my success was in terms of forging relationships with people and the project management side of the role. And on the consultancy team, it is integral to be good project managers. When you're dealing with a portfolio of clients, you need to be on top of your workload, and you need to make sure that every client feels the same level of professionalism, and that every client has the same level of exemplary service. So that's where I found my strengths, and I wanted to therefore go into an area of that was more focused on the client relationship side, and sort of cascading that knowledge down to other members of the team.
Fantastic. I guess it was at that point where you got to manager role, you decided that you maybe didn't want to follow the traditional or the more linear career path that was laid out for you.
I think so, and I think that was around 4 years ago now, and at that point, I thought that my career would probably progress quicker if I went down the process manager side than the people manager side. Now, at Leyton, it's a constantly changing environment, and I probably would have had some success in the people management side, but I wanted to sort of forge a niche that what I enjoy about Leyton is that they always, if you have a sort of well-formulated plan, your managers will always sort of help you to try and achieve your goals from that plan, and align with it. And I quite liked that, having a bit of a blank canvas and seeing where things went. But it's definitely, I know I sort of very tentatively compare it to someone who has a startup, in that it's not an easy journey, and it's sometimes it's quite it's quite challenging, but equally sometimes it's extremely rewarding, forging a path that that you've largely defined for yourself. So yeah, that's it. And I think sitting here 4 years on, I don't have any regrets, really.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're leading quite a large team within client delivery and client success now. So how did you pivot your career at that point then? So you decided you wanted to go down more process management, and what did that journey look like from making that decision to where you are now?
So initially, I sort of I still sit within the consultancy space, and we've annexed sort of the client delivery and client success team. They're within the consultancy team. So we are definitely more more closely aligned to them than we are the sales function. But in terms of my journey, I guess I sort of started by developing and devising training for other members of staff in terms of soft skills, because I think it's very easy in a consultancy role, especially one that has two distinct arms of tax and technical ability, to just focus on the knowledge gained and retained from those areas of science and technology or tax. And I think we need to ultimately, I definitely sound like a broken record to my team, but our job title is consultant. We are all a consultant, and to my mind, you can't do your job particularly well if you don't know how to consult. And there are a lot of soft skills that come with that perhaps had been in the past more implied. It's easy to think that you are good with people just off the bat. And I think if you actually take a step back and think in terms of forging professional relationships, it's very different to relationships in your personal life. And I think there definitely needs to be some guidance in that, and it needs to be given the same level of respect as learning actual tax, technical or scientific knowledge. So that's how I developed that training, gave that training, and gave constant refreshers about the customer perception cycle and how we need to position ourselves, and how we what the client experience we want is. So that's how I developed that training, gave that training, and then over time I had discussions with my manager at the time, his head of consulting, and we then looked at how I could expand the training and the knowledge into the consultancy team and what the consultancy team needed. So we did have a client delivery function, but it wasn't particularly defined. It didn't differentiate between new business and repeat revenue, and it was actually under sales, as it was deemed to be a continuation from the sales process and more soft skills based. But we decided to bring it into the consultancy team. Gradually we'd build up the team to cover all the jurisdictions in the UK, and to have a full coverage of all our client base. So that's the journey in a nutshell.
I think it does show it shows the journey that you've taken, and it shows the opportunity, as you've mentioned here at Leyton. You've spotted a gap where you think that we could improve what we're doing and level up the service that we offer to clients, which of course helps keep those clients on board with us and protect the business and generate revenue longer term. And the business has been supportive of you driving towards that niche and utilising your skill set and what you've seen to upskill the rest of the team. Choosing to go down a path that's not clearly defined for you, I imagine it's thrown up a few challenges. So was there any challenges that you faced whilst kind of resisting the pressure to follow a more traditional career path? And if so, how did you overcome them?
I think the biggest challenge is the traditional consultancy route and people management route is quite easy to measure. It's quite easy to measure success in terms of the volume or the value that you derive, and you can easily generate targets from that and KPIs. And when you look at something more soft skill focused, yes, it directly impacts things like how many clients we can retain, our general client experience, but it's more difficult to measure and to boil down into a KPI. When I've thought about what success looks like in this role, it's more difficult to define that success, because you can't measure client satisfaction other than in a survey or by retention. But ultimately, there are many factors at play that impact that end goal, as opposed to on the consultancy team, where it's easier to say or to define if someone is doing well or not so well. Going into this new sort of ether where I almost had to define my own KPIs, or at least work with my managers to define them. But because I wasn't sure on what they would be, I wasn't sure when I was devising them whether they'd be right, whether I would be able to meet them. And I think that's a challenge that, if I'm being honest, still exists today. It's a constantly evolving world. On the whole, it's something that, if you put your mind to it, and if you think about what you want from the role, i.e., I would like every single client at Leyton to have a 10 out of 10 experience and a very efficient but also unified process. I would want every client to be treated the same. That's when you can then think, right, what building blocks do I need to get there? And gradually the picture comes, it all becomes clear. I don't know, Sarah, have you ever watched Catchphrase?
Yes, I
Yeah,
have.
so it's just come to mind where gradually you see more and more of the picture, and then eventually you can sort of make a stab as to, is that the right answer? And I think, building on from that, I think what I was striving for was a right answer, because in consultancy, the right answer is or the perfect answer is to deliver every single one of your clients as efficiently as possible. But with client relationships, there is no right answer. And that's what I think, now that I appreciate that, that's helped me sort of go forward.
Yeah, and I can relate to this a lot. My previous roles have all been financial revenue driven, and it's very easy to see, as you say, whether you're delivering or achieving or overachieving. And similarly to you, you've moved into something. There's no one else at Leyton who does what I do. Just like when you've moved into your role, there was no one else at Leyton that did what you do, and it's hard to show performance when you're in that situation. But I think, as you've said, it's just measuring what you can and understanding that the metrics look very different to anything you've previously done, but just being able to evidence it and to talk about it, and you can build that picture up over time. It doesn't need to be the kind of finished article straight away. How did you identify and leverage your unique skill set and strengths to create this career path for yourself? You've talked about your love for building client relationships.
So I had the idea when I was looking at our appraisal form, and there were three areas of our appraisal form, or three main areas: quality of delivery, efficiency, and soft skills. And my quality in terms of the tax technical was always my lowest score. And it was something I managed to sort of get it up, and I constantly worked on that, because I've always learned that if you focus on your weaknesses, then your strengths should look after themselves. But I was facing an uphill battle, because however much I worked on it, there were always other people who were naturally better than me at that. And as much as I wanted to be great at everything, I will never be as gifted in that area as others. But then I was constantly outperforming others on the efficiency side and on the soft skills, to the extent that the head of consulting at the time, he upped my self-appraisal score from a 9 to a 10. And not to blow my own trumpet, but I was sat there thinking, oh, if I've got a 10 on that, then I must be quite good at that area. And maybe I should think about any ways that I can, because I look for guidance a lot in terms of the quality aspect. I was then thinking, well, maybe there are a few people that could look to me to head up the sort of soft skills side. And maybe we could, because we didn't really have any training around that side, but we had lots of training in terms of new legislation and accounting principles, or how to write a good technical report. And then I was thinking, well, if these three areas have equal weighting, they probably are of equal importance. And so that was my initial boost and sort of initial empowerment to think, well, if soft skills is that important that it makes it onto our appraisal, and if I am doing rather well in that regard compared to another area, if I want to progress in this business, I should focus on where I'm strongest. It was slightly easier to do that because we already did have process leads for tax and for report writing.
I think that's such an important point. Like you've looked at your potential future and you've seen, I could always be having to work really hard to keep my perceived weaknesses or the areas that aren't as strong at the right level, or I can really lean into the things that I'm good at, because it's hugely important that we get this right. And like you have areas for development, other people have different areas for development. It's something that you can support them with. So I think that the business has really benefited from you identifying that and leaning into it. And it's one of these things that we don't know what we need until someone's there to point it out and to take the chance to say, actually, I think there's a business case for this.
Exactly. And I think I also perform quite well on efficiency, but I only really performed well on efficiency because I was asking others for help with the tax technical stuff. And if I was sat there by myself working out a complex tax issue, it would probably take me double the amount of time as someone else. So if we collaborate, we can then become much more efficient in the same way that other people, if they had some guidance in terms of client relationships or project management, it would make them much more efficient. And thankfully it has. And I think now we have a fantastic L&D team who've sort of taken that training job out of my hands. They do a much better job than I could ever do. But it's really positive to see that go from nothing to now a sort of fully fledged area of L&D and one that is underpins what we do at Leyton.
Yeah. From a lot of your journey, I hear you being very considered about your next move and not rushing into anything. And I think that takes a lot of patience when you are someone who's clearly driven and ambitious. You want to progress in your career. Have you always been able to be patient about decisions within your career, or have you ever felt a pressure to advance quickly? And when did that change, or did it change at all?
That's a really good question. I'd like to say I'm a patient person. And the fact that my favourite sport to watch is Test cricket, which takes 5 days sometimes for a match to come to a result, and I can sit there and watch every single ball, proves that in some areas of life I have some patience. In terms of my professional career, I think it's hard. It is hard, but I think what keeps me going is that I started work following university age 21, 22, and hopefully will work till I'm 65 or even longer. So my career hopefully will be a long one, and I think people of course want to progress. I'm a competitive person. I was able to progress quite quickly at Leyton because it was I guess on the consultancy side, as we've alluded to before, it's quite easy to see who's performing well and not so well based on the metrics. So I was doing well there and progressing quite quickly. But then I took a step back and I thought, well, you can't rush into things, and ultimately, whilst it would be great to progress at an absolutely rapid rate, if it takes a few another year, another 18 months, but you actually get it right, you're going to have much more long-term success. So I think for me, I wouldn't say I'm a patient person, but I think that if you take a step back and realize that you will be on a long journey, you've got to have some element of patience, because I think what's worse would be going into a role where you feel out of your depth. And I think that's what's helped me is I don't want to progress at a rate and then find, actually there's so much expected of me and I don't really know what to do, because I'm not someone that wants to let people down. So if I'm in a role, I want to be able to perform to that level from the get-go. I don't want to be swimming against the tide. So yeah, that's where I fall on the patience.
I think that's a lot of like maturity and wisdom in the way that you can look at your career and make those decisions. And I don't judge you at all. I'm an incredibly impatient person. You've met me, Marco, you probably know that. But I I think that when we look at a career, and it's important, I think, for people who are entering the workforce and they're still at the start of their career, is to recognise that a career is a very long time. And the reality of the way that the world is now is we're likely to all have multiple careers because of the pace of technology and change, that we have to look forward and, as you've said, be okay with the fact that we're here for a long time and we have time to grow into roles and we have time to pick a career path that's going to be enjoyable for us. I think that's a really important point that you've made there.
And also I think just to sort of add to that, I think if you feel like a company is investing in you, which I've always felt at Leyton, then it's okay for it to take time, because if you're happy and content at the company and you see a path, then it's okay for it to take slightly longer. It's something that I discuss with my friends. We're sort of nine years out of uni now. I worked at one other place before I joined Leyton for 18 months, but I've been here for 8 years. And one of my other best friends has stayed in his job since leaving university. But again, he feels that they invest in him. And people say to both of us, well, I've changed companies 3 or 4 times, and I feel that I've taken a step up every time. And we've said, yes, but isn't that because you felt disenfranchised at your previous company and you needed to change, or your manager wasn't giving you that room for development? But I've always felt at Leyton that I've had that room for development, that investment in my future. And I look at other people that on the sales side, on the consultancy side, that have been at Leyton for a similar amount of time, and again, all of them have progressed up the senior management levels. So it proves 8 years might sound like a huge amount of time, and yes, it's a quarter of my life. My life's changed immeasurably since I joined Leyton, but it's when I look back on it, it feels right. It's a good position to be in.
100%. And I think that we all have slightly different drivers at work. Some people are very financially motivated, some people are recognition orientated or progression orientated. But I think that what I've noticed in my time at Leyton is that idea that people are challenged and they are stretched and they are invested in, whether that be training, as you've mentioned, our great talent development team, which has sort of grown and become what it is today, and is able to give back to the people who work here and develop us to be ready for the next role. And then that role is there for you, whether it's a kind of more traditional path that we have a defined career path there, or someone like yourself where you spot a niche and you can create something if there's a business case to support it. I think if you are feeling challenged in your role, you are able to be stretched in your role, and there's opportunity for you to progress and the support to get you into that, to get you ready for that next role. It's a very fortunate position to be in, and it makes sense that we have people like yourself who've been in the business for 8 years. So what advice would you give to people who maybe do feel pressure to follow a traditional career path but are considering that maybe something a bit more unconventional would suit their skill set better?
So I think what I didn't touch on earlier, and I think is important, is that I didn't just relinquish all my client delivery, all my consultancy overnight. And so initially my boss said, right, we can go down this path, but you can spend 30 to 40% of your time on that and still do some client delivery, i.e. still technically generate revenue for the business. My piece of advice is think, if I've got a strength or if there's an area I want to develop, you'll ask your manager if it can be a small part of your day-to-day and gradually let it take flight. And I think that's really important, because if this area hadn't been an area of success, then I could have said, okay, I've worked on that now for 6 months, a year, we're not really getting anywhere, let me just fit back 100% on delivery or look at another area. But I think that means you're not sort of pigeonholed. Think of it bit by bit. Think about the small wins that can make that impact. Again, it's important to note, I still have a few clients. I don't have many. I sort of only work on around 15 to 20 clients, but I still have a few. And that's what's good at Leyton, is that everyone at the business mucks in and does a lot. So I feel like whilst there is delineation of responsibility, I think everyone's happy to help in varying regards. And also from my perspective, those clients that I've built up a relationship with over 6-7 years, I want to maintain those relationships. And also I guess for me it almost vindicates that I've still got it in inverted commas. And how can I sort of be that person that oversees client relationships if I don't have any active cases, if I don't have any sort of live case studies? A new joiner to the business would probably take one look at me and think, why am I taking any guidance from him if he doesn't really if he doesn't do it himself?
I didn't know that you still did that. That's amazing. And I think it's so important, isn't it, that you are a role model for your team, but also you understand the challenges that your team are facing and that you understand what's important to clients because you actually speak to them. So thank you so much for your honesty and openness today, Marco. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we close up?
One small thing. I just think that Leyton's really good at investing in people. And it might be that you don't know today quite where you want to end up. And I think that's okay. I still don't really know what the end goal is. But if you focus on little incremental gains, gradually that picture sort of becomes clearer. I mean, I'm still a history of art graduate that went into accountancy because it opened more doors than it shut, and I thought that I was half decent at maths at school. And look at where I am now. It's, again, I could never have pictured this journey. I almost, if I ever interview people, I'll never ask the question, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? And that might sound very converse, and apologies if that's your favorite question to ask, but I don't have a clue. I don't have a clue where I want to be in 5 years' time. I have a good idea of where I want to be in a month's time, 2 months' time, but 5 years in my professional life, I mean, that's a question I can't answer. So I think if you just focus on the incremental gains, then the rest should look after itself.
Absolutely. I love that. And I agree with you. And I think that's like another important point that people realise is we don't need to have a plan, as long as you're come to work, you're passionate about doing a good job and you are able to deliver on that, then as you say, everything will take care of itself. Well, thank you so much. Thanks again, Marco. I really hope that everyone listening along has enjoyed that chat as much as I did. So we're going to be back in a few weeks' time with our next episode. But until then, if you're one of the members in our talent community and you're interested in finding out more about what the future might look like at Leyton, please do reach out to one of us here in the talent acquisition team. I'll put my contact details in the description below. Or check out our careers page for the roles that we have live currently. We'll be back in a few weeks. Thanks again, Marco, for sharing your story, and thank you all for listening in. This has been the Life at Leyton podcast.